Welcome. In this lecture, we will talk about one of the very interesting topics under the heritage crafts, that is, how our crafts existed in the past. Now, when we talk about crafts in the past, one very important thing that we need to understand is that a person who is designing the craft is called as craftsman. Now, this craftsman has to have various views in mind. For example, how to design, if there is a problem, how to solve it. So the craftsman should be a creator as an innovator as well. Also, what is the local demand? If that is well understood, the skills can be brought in the same line and therefore better response can be provided. So there is always a relationship between the client and the craftsman. And what is that relation? The craftsman should understand the need of the client, then should be able to solve the problem, and thirdly, he should have the right skill and the ideas or innovative approach to solve that problem. Let me take a very simple example. In the region of Meghalaya, Cherrapunji is one of the places along with Manswaram which are the places which receive very heavy rainfalls. Now, when they receive very heavy rainfall, if I make a bridge of wood, if I make a bridge of iron, there would be problem. The wood would get rotted, the iron would have rusting. So these things cannot exist in that climate or in that region. So what the local dwellers did was they actually learned how to train the aerial roots of ficus plant. Now this ficus tree has the aerial roots. Now they trained those aerial roots in order that they were either had to bind with the stream at some position, with the boulders at some position, and then they created a bridge. Now this is an example of living root bridge which is seen in Meghalaya. This bridge also has a small stones so that a footpath can be created onto it. But this is a fabrication because there was a problem and this problem was to be solved. So it required creation and innovation, and also the local demand need to be understood that people need to cross the river, and when they need to cross the river, there has to be some way in which this has to be resolved. So role of craftsmen is indeed really interesting. Now, specialization of craft is another important thing that we need to understand. India, as in most parts in the world, has been training artisans. Now these artisans either are employed by some organization or they are self-employed. So this process of development of craft started only once people were able to have a settled life. That means they were either able to have an agricultural land or were able to cultivate. Only then this specialization of craft could start. Before that, it wasn't into existence. So those who were preparing agriculture in their free time, some of them used to create containers made of either clay, straw or reed, and this was to keep the agricultural produce they had. Sometimes they also tried to make footwear. They were trying to create equipments to plow the field. So sickles and scythes were created using iron. Also, they started to weave clothes. So clothes from flax and cotton were created. This craft, once specialized, brought an alternative source of income. So it became a lucrative profession thereon because it was bringing additional income to the family. Even with the barter systems, it was bringing in extra benefits to the families, and also the production could be done in the lean months when agriculture was not to be taken care of, or the production could be carried for months. Now if we talk about civilizations like Indus Valley civilization, we see earthen pots, we see votive figures. Now all those are examples of craftsmanship. Creation of cotton garments, the trade of cotton with Mesopotamia during the Indus Valley civilization. Similarly, we had the trade with Greek cultures. The votive figures, the size and the shapes indicated the sophistication that the artist had. Also, supplying the water throughout the city. As we can see in the Indus Valley civilization, the sewerage and the drainage was at 90 degrees, and this was one of the important landmarks for craftsmanship that could be witnessed. The next is textiles. Now textile developed in west, south and east. In the west it was mainly in the regions of Gujarat and Rajasthan, in the south along the Coromandel coast, and in the east in the regions of Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. These were the areas where textile actually flourished. Now Sangam literature between 100 BC to 600 AD talks about weaving of silk as well as threading of cotton. Right? So silk and cotton were two important fabrics that were established, and there was a section of society which worked on streets, and they were called as Karugar Vidhi or the Aruval Vidhi. Now these were the people who were engaged with textile manufacturing, weaving and creating cloth either of silk or of cotton. The next important system that existed was the trade guilds, or what were called as Shrenis. Now these Shrenis, if we talk about the place from the time of Ramayana, Gupta period, Sangam literature, we see that these traders were well reputed in the society. Each guild had their own chief who would look after the other members, and the chief would take care of the functions of the trade guild very carefully. Some of the guilds came together and found a joint organization, and this was known as Nigam. Now Nigam had certain rules and regulations which were prescribed, and it was a kind of chamber of commerce which existed. So it was a chamber of commerce and industry, we can say, and this was responsible for also the exports from the region. So exports were brought through the Nigam. So these Shrenis and the trade guilds were considered as stationary organizations, stable organizations, and the persons who were part of these Shrenis were considered well reputed in the society. It had huge number of members which were part of it. Now coming on to the social dimensions, as I said, some of the craftsmen were employed, the other were self-employed. Some were involved in service or exchange relations. That means I would be producing certain craft, in exchange of this give me this. And this later on evolved into a system called as Jajmani system. Now bulk of craft production took place in India up till the time where colonial rule was there. Immediately for the local rural markets, the needs were satisfied and small units were surviving, which were bringing additional incomes to the family. Even if we talk about the period of Kautilya, he had talked about two types of artisans. One who were working on their own, called as self-employed, the other who were engaged with others, called as employed with others. At this time, Jajmani system evolved. Now, this Jajmani system was a reciprocal relationship between those producing craft and the other members of the village. So, the upper caste did not work with certain occupation, but they were resourceful with land. So, what they do was they were looking for labor. Now, when they were looking for labor, they were happy to give in land, rent-free land, or certain basic residence sites, or basic facilities of food. In some cases even cow dung was given that was required for agriculture, and this way the upper caste people actually traded with the lower caste or the people who were engaged with the craft, and this was through the Jajmani system. The basic idea was to have a stable supply of labor, so that labor was always available to the upper caste in order to help them in the varied occupations they required. Also, during the Sultanate period, during the Mughal period, there were the term called as karkhanas or factories that came into evolution, and these karkhanas or factories were established by the state. Now, during the Mughal period, there were specialized crafts, for example, making of shawl, carving of stone, jewellery, meenakari, luxury textiles, small miniature paintings. But later on, there was a slow decline in the Mughal art that was witnessed. Now, this decline was basically because the people were not able to find the right employment with the Mughal kingdom, and the Mughal kingdom was declining. So the people moved to the regions of Rajasthan, for example, Jaipur, Udaipur, and parts of Jodhpur in particular, and these were the areas where these crafts evolved. Also, some of them moved to the region of Deccan and Bengal, where these crafts evolved later. So the art of miniature painting, the art of meenakari, luxury textiles flourished in those areas. Now, when the Mughals arrived in India, their arrival was considered with Indian art, and at that time decorative arts from China, Iran, Central Asia was brought in. Even Aine Akbari, which was an autobiography of Akbar, mentions that there were skilled craftsmen from all over India, and Akbar used to personally look into and honor the craftspeople, and that was one of the important aspects that was seen. Over the last 150 years, recently we have seen more than 700 craft museums of different ways which came into existence. For example, we have a crafts museum in New Delhi established in 1972, known as the National Handicraft and Handloom Museum. In Kolkata, in the name of Ashutosh Museum in 1937. In Ahmedabad, two important museums. One is established by Gira Sarabhai as Calico Museum, which is for the textile. The other is the Utensil Museum, again a very unique museum in itself. Now, by the Nizam, there was the Salarjung Museum, but later on it was donated to Government of India in 1958. Raja Dinkar Kelkar Museum, this was in Pune. Dinkar Kelkar himself was fond of going across places, and he visited various places, collected nearly 21,000 different objects and articles, and those are present in the Raja Dinkar Kelkar Museum in Pune. Similarly, we have Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya in Bhopal, which focuses and preserves the folk culture, the tribal forms across India. So those are some of the very unique craft museums that exist in India. So this was an introduction from the first chapter. We'll be continuing with continue with our classes on heritage craft in the upcoming sessions. Stay tuned, a very important part for your India art and culture section.